Welcome to the November 4th edition of the Tennessee World Affairs Council's Global News Review. I'm Patrick Ryan, and I'm joined by Ambassador Dick Bowers and Dr. Breck Walker. Good afternoon.
How are you, Pat? Good to see you.
We're doing well here. We've survived an overnight turbulence. I don't know if you caught it on your TV screen last night. It was an interesting night for all, I think.
Well, the interest keeps going. That's who knows? This is not going to be over for a few days, I don't think.
It was a little bit of deja vu all over again relative to 2016 in terms of the results not being known for some time.
Yeah, a little anxiety going around depending on which side of the aisle you're on. Just for record purposes, it's November 4th in the afternoon. For those joining us at a later viewing on our youtube.com/TNWAC version of the Global News Review, we are awaiting the results of the counting in the presidential election, and we'll see what happens. But today we're going to talk about the international reaction and what's the view around the world on what's happening in election 2020. Any opening comments about what we've been seeing and should expect to see in the coming days, or you just want to jump into it? You fellows got comments?
Well, I'll throw out an opening comment. I think it's going to be a rocky road here for the next few days. And then my sense is that Biden is going to get to 270 and maybe just a little bit over in the electoral vote count, and will be unofficially or officially declared to be the president, but that's not going to end it. So there'll be legal challenges, and there'll be a lot of antics going on from the other side who will accuse the election of being stolen, or somebody brought in massive amounts of ballots, etc. It's a much closer race than I figured it was going to be. And the Democratic tsunami with the blue water didn't really happen that much. And it looks like we're going to have divided government, with the White House and the House being Democratic, and we'll have the Senate again controlled by the Republicans with Mitch McConnell at the helm. So it's going to be a rocky transition, and then once we get into it, it's going to be kind of divided government. So I don't know how it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
And I'd add a couple of things if it's okay.
Sure.
And of course, they're still counting, but earlier this morning, Biden surpassed and became the president, or nominee, I should say, the person running for president who has received the most aggregate votes in U.S. history. And I think the last number I saw was 69.5 or 6 million, which was a couple 100,000 above what President Obama got. So Biden now holds that record. And related to that, Kanye West was on the ballot in 12 states, and he received in the aggregate, still counting, but he has 59,731 votes. And it's interesting that his strongest state performance was in Tennessee, where he got a little over 10,000 votes. So I just passed that along in case anybody was interested in that.
Was Pat Paulson on the ballot?
Good question.
For those of a certain age.
The one other thing I wanted to mention is that right now, of course, you can, if you were in Las Vegas, you could walk up to one of the casinos and place a bet on who's going to win from this point forward. And the odds that they're offering as of noon today translate into a 75 to 80% probability that Biden's going to prevail. So if the Las Vegas bettors are right, Biden still appears to be a heavy favorite.
Yeah. Was that a web page that you had bookmarked when you were in the world of finance?
It's one of those pop-ups I get every day.
Speaking of finance, Breck, why don't you just give us a brief tutorial on what's going on in the market and the forecast for the economy, taxes, and et cetera, looking at the potential for a Biden administration?
Well, it was interesting last night on that. I'll just make a couple of very quick comments. Last night, before the, probably about 6 p.m. Central Time, before election results started being reported, the futures market for the S&P 500 started trading up, meaning that it was going to be a big day in the market today. And then once some of the results were reported where it was not going to be a blue wave, and actually President Trump was doing better than the pollsters anticipated, the S&P 500 futures started dropping. In fact, and for a daily percentage amount, they dropped quite a bit and went back to even. But today, the Dow is up over 600 points. The NASDAQ at noon was up, I think, over 3%. And I think that reflects two things. It certainly reflects the market's view that a Biden victory is going to be good for the economy, at least in the short run. And I think that is for two reasons. One, the Democrats, the market believes at least, the Democrats are going to provide more stimulus, pandemic-related stimulus in coming months that will be good for business. And secondly, the market's probably positive on the Senate seemingly or probably remaining Republican, because that will put the kibosh on tax increases and additional business regulations and so forth. So the market's pretty positive on where we are right now, at least at this moment.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that update. And I know Ambassador Bowers was one of Kanye's votes. I don't know who the 9,900 other ones were. All right, well, let's get into it here. First, I just want to ask our viewers to mark their calendars. December 9th at 6 p.m., that's December 9th. We have a special program, the United Nations at 75. The Journey Continues. This is one of the collaborations we are doing with 6 other World Affairs Councils in the network of World Affairs Councils. And this will be a celebration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, and to gain an understanding of what the challenges are going forward. Our keynote remarks will be delivered by Ambassador Thomas Pickering, who we had the great fortune of having on our Election 2020 program a week ago on America's Place in the World. Ambassador Pickering was the U.S. ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations back during the time of the Desert Storm Gulf War, and he marshaled the wherewithal in the diplomatic community in New York at the UN for the coalition that was involved in that. In addition to Ambassador Pickering, we have the French ambassador, former French ambassador Gerard Ayrault, who was the French permanent representative to the United Nations and the ambassador to the United States. Along with them will be Linda Fasullo, the NPR correspondent for the UN. She's been a long-time journalist at the UN, has written a couple of books about how the United Nations works. And Mr. Samuel Roche from the Truman Library. And our historians among us will know that the United Nations has its roots in the Truman administration era, and the Truman Presidential Library in Missouri has a great collection of UN-related materials. So Samuel Roche, the supervisory archivist at the library, will be with us. And then January 28th, mark on your calendar, the Future of Korea Project will have representatives from the Korean Embassy, the State Department, and the Korean Economic Institute talking about U.S.-Korea relationship in the evening. That'll be preceded by a meeting earlier in the day between business people. Let me remind you that our regular programming, Global Nashville with Carl Dean next week, he'll be talking with a panel of 4 members of the Kurdish community. We'll be talking about Little Kurdistan in Nashville and what's happening in that thriving and populous community, one of the major immigrant communities in our fair city. On December 8th, Ms. Kate Burke, the Chief Operating Officer of Alliance Bernstein, will be talking with Carl about what's happening in Nashville as far as AB's relocation to downtown. And a reminder that every Wednesday, Ambassador Dick Bowers, Dr. Breck Walker, and I will be here dutifully reporting the global news. And you can check the tnwac.org/calendar page to get the details on the dates we might be skipping a day due to the holidays coming up, so that you don't check in and we're not here. And you can also sign up for programs there. Lastly, let me remind you that the Academic WorldQuest competition is coming up, and WorldQuest is our academic, our education outreach flagship program. Involves high school students. We have a practice round in December, a championship round in February. It's kind of like a quiz bowl, multiple choice questions. So we encourage you to contact students and teachers you may know in your area and invite them to get involved in Academic World Quest. It's a great opportunity for young people to get involved with what's going on in the world. And lastly, let me make a pitch for membership. We are a membership organization. There are many members-only benefits, one of which will be a special members-only night in January. Professor Thomas Schwartz, a distinguished historian from Vanderbilt, will be talking to a Zoom meeting of members only about his current class on the history of the Cold War and teaching Cold War history to students who may not have much of a connection with the Cold War. So check out membership benefits. We have a newsletter, a custom newsletter for our members, and of course, the world famous Tennessee World Affairs Council coffee mug. Dick, I think we still owe you a coffee mug from Debate Watch Bingo.
Yeah?
We'll
Bring it on. Let's do it.
We'll have that coming to you. Okay, without further ado, let me ask Dr. Breck Walker to talk about our question of the week. And Breck, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Let me remind everyone, if I could, that you can receive the TENWAC What in the World weekly quiz by subscribing to our email list on the tenwac.org website. Now, today's question comes from that weekly quiz, and is our routine. We present a question drawn from reports published by our friends at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And here's the question. An event last week at the U.S. Institute of Peace highlighted the 20th anniversary of this action, which represented the first time that this body had addressed the disproportionate and unique impact of armed conflict on women and girls. It also recognized the critical role women can and do play in peace building. And the possible answers are A, UN Security Council Resolution 1325, B, amendment to the WHO, the World Health Organization Charter, C, United States congressional resolution during the Year of Women, and D, President Clinton's Executive Order 15261 on women and peace building. And we'll have our answer at the end of the program. Thanks, Pat.
Great. Dick, do you want to give us a brief warm-up of what we're going to talk about today?
Well, we're going to talk about what's going on around the world as far as they're looking at and digesting U.S. elections. So how's the world see us? What is right and what is wrong? There are some places that are disappointed that Mr. Trump appears to be not in the lead. Other places are very happy that he's not in the lead. So we'll just kind of roam around the world and talk about what's going on. And I'll just throw out that, tell you how old I am. I went to the convention in San Francisco with Barry Goldwater back in 1964. So
I thought you were gonna say the UN Charter Convention, but
no, I haven't. No, I'm not quite. Well, actually, I've been to San Francisco to the Opera House where the charter was signed, but it was a little bit before my time.
Well, you're a California kid, so you've been all those places.
Yeah,
Berkeley and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, well, let's jump in, and this is as Ambassador Bowers mentioned, this will depart from our normal three-topic deep dive into the news, because after the election day yesterday, and even though we're still waiting to see the final results, we note that the world is watching in a way that sort of rivals the way they pay attention to their own elections. Certainly not in any reflection of the way the United States looks at what's going on in other countries. But as we look at the presidential election that's taking shape, we note that foreign policy towards our allies is squarely in the view of countries around the world. For example, in Australia and Indonesia, crowds were gathered around television and cafes trying to get a glimpse of states turning red or blue. A lot of correspondents on news shows were giving tutorial tutorials on how the American electoral college system works, and why there's a big map of the United States and most of it's red and little spots of blue, but that the number of influential electoral college members from those small geographic areas are equivalent to larger places. For example, Montana has just a handful of electoral votes, and it's as big as California. I know Dick is going to correct me on that, but California holding, what is it, 55 electoral votes. So viewers of the news around the world were reported to have been paying great attention, trying to learn what's going on in our election. Many of them were concerned about the threats of violence. They saw scenes of people getting armed up and boarding up, and fences going up. So it really belied the American promise of democracy that many countries around the world had admired for some time. To quote an observer in Le Monde, the French newspaper, who was talking about President Trump warning that he was going to have the Supreme Court shut down the vote at 2 a.m. this morning. He said that Donald Trump is playing with fire in a context that is already quite explosive. So, people around the world, our friends and our adversaries are watching, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to tick through some topical areas and some geographic areas. I'll just start out with a couple of developments. The Asian stock markets are reported as having mixed trading as the stock markets were awaiting reaction to the election. And as Breck mentioned, here in the US, the stock markets were taking a positive approach and the market is up significantly today. But markets around the world are, they have a different calculus in how they're looking at the election. Meanwhile, in China, the state media, there was a little comment from the official government, but state media, which reflects the position of the Communist Party, was saying that the United States has serious problems, and they played upon, disparaged the notion of American democracy. In Moscow, pro-Kremlin media was talking about the likelihood that there would be chaos and fighting in the streets. Meanwhile, the Brazil's president, Jair Bolsonaro, criticized Vice President Biden for his calls to protect the Amazon from overdevelopment. So you can see that in many countries, not only were they observing our election process and being critical of the conditions surrounding it, the threat of violence, the threat of armies of lawyers going to court, the disparagement of the democracy, there was also a lot of conversation about individual prospects for this or that candidate relative to that country. So, for example, some friends of the United States were concerned about the continued position of the U.S. in its withdrawal from the World Health Organization and the Paris Paris Climate Accord. And I'll note that midnight last night was the effective date for the United States leaving the Paris Climate Accord. So that's how some of the countries around the world were looking at what's happening in the United States vis-a-vis our election. Dick, do you want to pick up with?
Well, just start. I think my take here. The Canadians are going to be very happy that if Mr. Biden succeeds to become president, and it appears that is on the tracks to happen. But we have to be patient and get all the votes counted and all the various legal challenges taken care of. The United States has gone from being a beacon to the rest of the world, and first time in my life, few months back, the word pity was used to describe the United States, that we just didn't seem to have our act together and what was going on and why it's happening. The Mexicans, I think, are going to be a little happier that Mr. Biden comes in. So, and Latin America may get a little bit more attention than it's gotten under the Trump administration, where the entire attention seemed to be involved with the flow of migrants out of Central America and Mexico. The rest of the world, the Israelis probably are not happy. They got along well with Mr. Trump because Mr. Trump gave them some things that they wanted, like support on the settlements on the West Bank and moving the embassy of the United States to Jerusalem, which effectively negates the international community's desire to try to have Jerusalem continue to be an open city. So there's a lot out there for people to chew on. One of the things that sort of, you mentioned tutorials. How we do elections is something that the rest of the world really doesn't understand. And this whole role of the Electoral College and how that works, and the power shift that the Electoral College gives to small states, because everybody gets at least 3 elector votes, and then you build on that, regardless of population. So my sense is that Mr. Biden will come in and will reverse a whole lot of stuff that Mr. Trump has done. For example, we'll probably try to go back into the Paris Agreement. We'll stay in the WHO. We'll reinforce what we have done to take care of international institutions and support them. And there'll be a lot of talk about supporting our NATO allies, drawing lines in the sand against dictators and things of that sort. So it's going to be an interesting time, and just getting through the next few weeks is going to be a real roller coaster that the world is going to be watching. So that's preliminary comments.
Breck?
Yeah, Pat, I'd add to that if I could. There was a recent opinion poll published just a couple of days ago in a German scholarly journal that polled the EU, people in the EU, on who their preferred presidential candidate was in the United States. And Biden came out with 45% of the vote. Trump came out with 17% of the vote, and neither came out with 38% of the vote. So I think that's interesting in terms of, and Dick mentioned, how dysfunctional much of Europe views the United States. And in the commentary that I was reading, of course, most leaders of our allies are reluctant at this point to say much one way or the other. They are pretty tight-lipped about it because they don't want to do anything that might cause whoever ends up as president to get mad at them about that. So they're pretty tight-lipped, but there's a lot of commentary from legislators and newspapers and so forth. And the one theme that keeps returning in the material I was reading was a concern in the short run that the American election becomes hugely contested. Some level of chaotic street violence breaks out, and that serves as a tremendous propaganda victory for those countries like China and Russia, to mention two, that have more authoritarian-oriented government. I think the Russian press is already saying to the Russian people, aren't you glad you don't live in the United States? Bad things have happened, and bad things are really coming over the next week or two. So I think one EU politician said that if American democracy, which is the epitome of at least how Europe looks at, is the epitome of democracy and democratic institutions, if that descends into a chaotic situation, what does that mean for the rest of us? It pulls us all down. It hurts all of our credibility, and it gives support and momentum to those nationalists and populists that are beginning to arise in parts of Western Europe. It gives support to their movements, and so said this politician. So those would be my comments on that. I did have one quote. You all may remember. Do you all remember Amanda Knox, by chance, who was the foreign exchange student from the United States that was in Italy and was accused of murdering a fellow exchange student and was convicted and arrested. And then the United States got involved, and that court decision was eventually overturned. Well, Amanda Knox has tweeted what she thinks about the election, and her tweet says, whatever happens, the next 4 years can't be as bad as my 4 years study abroad that I did in Italy, right? Question mark. And I like that quote because it is very Trumpian in its self-focus. So I pass that along as well.
Well, thanks for that, Breck. I'll mention a couple of citations here from a BBC piece, and I think this reflects the fact that many of our allies and adversaries are looking at the election as sort of a mile marker in their relationship with the United States, either a chance to reset the relationship if there's a new administration, or simply just to identify what the points of contention or agreement in some cases with what's happening in the United States. In France, there was a finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, who told Radio Classique, whether Joe Biden or Donald Trump is elected by Americans tonight or tomorrow, nothing changes this strategic fact. The American continent has detached itself from the European continent. And I think that's reflective of the position of a lot of our allies. In Germany, the defense minister, Karen Bauer, warned that the U.S. was facing a very explosive situation, and that if the election went to the courts, it could result in a constitutional crisis that would impact the United States' ability to conduct itself abroad. And I think across Europe, we're seeing our friends there view what's been happening in the United States and the relationship with the EU and NATO and individual bilateral relations somewhat with a sense of increased urgency and concern.
We're on a rocky road. I mean, it's I think, assuming that a Biden administration comes in, he's going to move quickly to try to re-engage the world in a more normal fashion. So the U.S. will be back at the table with at a number of these institutions that we've kind of either ignored or boycotted or said we don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. And as one of your colleagues in the previous program talked about, Pat, the question of, do we have to be at the head of the table or just be at the table? And I think the key is to be at the table. But once we get at that table, be it the WHO or the UN or UNICEF or whatever international institution we're engaged with, we will be pulled into a leadership role because there's nobody else to lead the world like the United States does. And that is critical to our own personal national interest to have good relations with the democratic countries of the world, especially, and to have relations with non-democratic institutions and non-democratic governments where we can at least have a dialogue that will keep us aware of what's going on and let the other side know what we stand for and what we're all about. It's going to take a while for that to occur. It's going to be interesting to see how long it goes until we have the electors showing up. What is it? The 5th of December is the day they arrive in DC, I think, to actually cast the votes that officially create the president-elect. So yeah, it's going to be a long time.
Yeah, it's that week in DC when they come together. You mentioned some of our previous guests. We had Dr. Richard Wyke from the Pew Research Center with us for part of our election 2020 coverage, and our viewers can check out the conversation with him in the global issues section, the edition of our election 2020 special reports. But he had just finished, before he joined us for the panel, an extensive Pew Research project gauging the support of countries, our allies and adversaries, for U.S. policies, the United States in general, the leadership of the Trump administration. And, this is kind of reflective of where the United States stands in the world. 41% of the United Kingdom expressed a favorable opinion of the U.S., the lowest percentage registered in any Pew Research Center survey ever. In France, the favorability rate was 31% of French see the U.S. positively, and that matched the sad ratings of 2003 at the height of U.S. tensions with France over the Iraq War. And Germans marked the United States as 26% of Germans viewed the U.S. favorably. So we've got some work to do with our allies, and there may be some people who question, who cares? But whenever you want to get something done in the world, you need to have these coalitions, and our strongest relationship with countries around the world is the NATO alliance. So there's some rebuilding these bridges that needs to happen.
Absolutely.
Well, in fact, Pat, on the talking again about the elections 2020 series of panels that we had, one of the things that I thought that there was reasonable unanimity on among the panelists were the fears among our allies from a foreign policy perspective, the fears among our allies concerning a second-term Trump presidency and policies that would, among other things, that he might think about, that the Trump administration might think about pulling out of NATO, or at least raising issues as to whether the United States was likely to live up to its obligations to other NATO members if a crisis arose, that a second Trump administration might continue to show support for the rise of nationalism and support and at times even admiration for more authoritarian leaders like Putin and others in Eastern Europe that have come to power recently, that the America First program could hurt them economically, that the U.S. is no longer under a Trump presidency, for better or for worse, a free trade. It does not have a free trade orientation anymore, and that is something that worries a lot of the allies. That a lack of, by the Trump administration, a lack of strategic and geopolitical consultation with the leadership of our allies, and in fact, just as Dick said a minute ago, taking the reins and exerting leadership of the broad Western alliance. People no longer look to the United States as they used to. And this didn't start with Trump. I think you could argue that started perhaps in a big way under the presidency of George W. Bush. But nevertheless, I think most leaders among our allies like the idea of the United States taking a leadership position. And then lastly, I think that people were very concerned, leadership is very concerned of how we're going to manage our relationship with China going forward, both economically and militarily or geopolitically. That's going to require some nuance and some great strategic thinking and having the right people in place to help you do that. And I think our allies coming out of those panels, election 2020, I think there's real concern among our allies that we don't have the team to do that in an effective way.
Right. Well, you mentioned China, and the BBC, they highlighted the Chinese state-run news media as focusing disparagingly on the U.S. elections. They said that the coverage, they aired footage of the heavy police presence in Washington and protesters shoving one another near the White House, even though the actual protests on Tuesday evening were largely peaceful. The Washington Post, talking about China, said that the state-run tabloid, the Global Times, declared the election looked like one in a developing nation. Meng Jiwei, deputy foreign editor of the state-run Xinhua news agency, described the United States as without hope. He said, it is clear the United States has problems with national competitiveness and social governance capacity, and that it needs serious and profound internal reforms. And this description by that official was viewed 3.4 billion times on the Chinese social platform Weibo. so I guess there were a lot of Chinese who were looking at it multiple times because that's a lot of page views. Another Chinese official, a former advisor to China's cabinet, said that they hope after Biden comes back, they can at least resume high-level dialogue, and noted that Biden wants to compete with China, but also collaborate, and that's how we frame the relationship too. To see the democratic system in the world's most powerful country go off the rails is not a good thing. So that's the view from China. They may be seeing a relationship with Biden as a better deal than what they've had with President Trump.
I think, Pat, it seems to me that a lot of the sort of functioning countries in the world saw Mr. Trump as being chaotic and erratic, and what does he stand for? What can we expect from that man? So the idea of kind of going back to statecraft and diplomacy and having things done in a manner which normal countries do things, I think is going to be very much welcomed by most countries around the world. And I think that Mr. Biden, again, assuming he ends up in office, he will move quickly to appoint some very seasoned and rational people to senior positions and engage the world again.
Yeah. Dick, on the other side of the aisle, there are those who look forward to a second term for President Trump. The Washington Post piece that I was talking about mentioned that in India, where President Trump found friends in the Hindu nationalist Prime Minister Narendra Modi's right-wing leading pro-government group, they're hoping for a second term for President Trump, despite the fact that the vice presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, has Indian roots, which many in India have been celebrating. One fringe group called the Hindu Army hosted a prayer ceremony to boost Trump's chances at the polls, saying that Donald Trump is the savior of humanity. So there, he's got his advocates in India, in Israel. Settlers in the West Bank also gathered to pray for Trump's reelection. Settler leaders have expressed concern that a Trump loss could mean a backpedaling of the U.S. Embassy, as you mentioned, Dick, and renewed U.S. criticism of Jewish settlements in the West Bank. And I'll mention lastly that in Slovenia, the homeland of First Lady Melania Trump, the Slovenian Prime Minister, Janez Janša, tweeted, "Go win at real Donald Trump." So there was at least one tweet from Slovenia in support of.
Well, there are going to be a number of people that are, assuming that Mr. Trump loses, that are going to be sad that that's. For example, the folks with the chainsaws that are working away at the Amazon rainforest right now, I think that's going to be something that the Biden administration would try to discuss with the Brazilians. Say, hey, we need to do something about that. The Latin Americans as a whole, I think countries, the Venezuelans, I don't know where they're going. That's going to be difficult. Bolivia has basically gone back to a center-left government and had a peaceful election and transition of power. So that's going to be going. Chile is having a hard time, but they're moving. And they've had a recent plebiscite on renewing their constitution, which was left over from the days of Pinochet and the dictatorship of the military. So Brazil, Bolsonaro is a hard right guy, and he liked Mr. Trump. Same, I think, when you jump over to Europe, the Hungarian leader is the same sort of populist guy. And so those folks are going to look at a Biden win as not really in their interests. But I think most of the rest of the world is going to see that, well, maybe the United States has gained its senses again and is going to go back to doing things in a normal fashion in the international arena.
Yeah.
Pat, related to that, I just add a couple of interesting things coming out of the Russian media. over the last 24 hours. And one is that some of the Kremlin-backed media sources are suggesting that, at least from a popular vote standpoint today, it's so similar to what it was in 2016 that they're making the argument that the Russian media is making the argument that in some sense that proves that Russian interference in the US elections in 2016 and even in 2020 are more a figment of imaginations over here than they reflect actual fact. And the second thing is the Russian media is portraying Putin as a little bit more ambivalent about who gets elected than I would have thought, saying that Putin has been all in all disappointed in Trump because Trump did not, he was not successful in improving relations, bilateral relations between the United States and Russia. And in fact, Russia's been beset by sanctions imposed by the United States government throughout the Trump administration, and Trump has not been able to fix that. So they're saying, we don't really care who wins. In some respects, we don't think we necessarily want Trump to win. We want somebody we can do business with.
Methinks thou doth protest too much. Mr. Putin has certainly gotten a great deal out of Mr. Trump. We're still wondering what happened at the Helsinki summit meeting in which the two of them went off to a room together and there were no notes and no disclosure of what the conversations were. Multiple conversations with the Russian leader, hosting the Russian foreign minister and Ambassador Kislyak in the Oval Office. I mean, the list goes on of bizarre behavior of a president of the United States relative to the president of Russia. If you look at the fractures in the Western Alliance, and there's no doubt that there's something. And national security professionals have been saying this all along. There's something unexplained in the relationship between the Oval Office and the Kremlin.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that struck me too about talking about how the world views all this, the capability of the world to watch what's going on in the United States in real time. That's a phenomenon that's continuing to grow. But you go back. My first election overseas was in 1968, and I was in Panama. And at that time, we had a very small consulate right on the Costa Rican border, and I was sent up to babysit that consulate for a few weeks. And it just happened to be in November when the elections. And we had a single sideband radio that we were trying to listen in to the Voice of America feed about what's going on with the election. And we had a big blackboard where we had Nixon and Humphrey, and then they had the states. And as the voting tallies came in, we'd write them on the board. It's very different than the kind of way we do it now, where instantaneously, you're sitting wherever you are in the world, you can zoom into Fox News or CNN or whatever, and find out what's going on. And that's an open, transparent thing that I think is good for the world to see how legalistically open and transparent our elections are. And especially what's going on today as the cameras go inside some of the areas where people are actually counting the ballots and the safeguards that everybody has in place to take care of those things. So, but we are, one of the second thought that I have is that we are increasingly becoming a polarized nation where the cities are democratically inclined and the countryside is not. Mr. Trump won Tennessee by 61% of the vote. If you look at Davidson County, 60-some% went to Biden. But Blount County, Campbell County, Cobb County, all of the rural areas in Tennessee overwhelmingly went to Mr. Trump. So I don't know how a new administration is going to be able to quickly overcome that. I think America going to have to decide what kind of country we want to be and how civil we want to be to each other. And it's going to take a while to overcome all of these divisions.
All right. Well, it's time to wrap up. Breck, do you want to take a whack at our summary for us today?
Sure, I'll mention a couple, three things that I'm coming away with, and you all hop in, please. But one is, and stating the obvious, is that a presidential election is a big darn event throughout the world because the U.S. has such a dominant influence throughout the world. And I would say that certainly in Western Europe, people pay almost as much attention to our presidential election as they might to their own. The second thing I think is that at least our allies need, greatly desire the United States to have a competent federal government, a competent presidency, a competent Congress that is thoughtful and makes good decisions and collaborates. And our enemies don't want that. They want the reverse. They'd like to see chaos and dysfunction and the U.S. government brought into disrepute and so forth. And even more than that, I think that our allies and the democratic side of the world wants to see the United States as a dominant nation. They want to see the U.S. as a very successful economy because that's going to benefit others throughout the world. They want to see the U.S. with a dominant military because they have confidence that the U.S. is not going to use that military to, in many instances, for nefarious purposes. They want the United States in collaboration, but they want the United States to assume Western leadership, I think, and they want the United States even to serve from time to time as the world's policeman, to step in when nobody else will and say this is not right. And I think that particularly an election that becomes so divided, those global feelings about who we are and what the world expects of us really come to the forefront. And in one sense, it makes you kind of proud, or makes me, I should say, kind of proud. But in another sense, it's a great responsibility that we seem to be not living up to right now.
Yeah. Dick, any last thoughts?
I'm with Dr. Walker on all that. I think the world needs leadership, and when to just look at the COVID response, there's nobody in charge of trying to make it happen, and it's just going to get worse. I would hope that Mr. Biden comes in and really starts working with the rest of the world, because it's a worldwide problem, and you can't solve worldwide problems by building fences and trying to hunker down inside your national borders. So I'm looking for leadership, and it's going to be a tough couple of months till we get to January, but we've got to change.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Breck.
I'm just going to close with one thing. Apparently yesterday, Election Day, was also National Sandwich Day. And Stephen Colbert tweeted last night, easily the most stressful National Sandwich Day in my lifetime.
We all have our crosses to bear.
Do one other thing. On the news last night, there was a brief snippet about how U.S. Cyber Command had taken offensive operations against some enemies overseas, i.e. Iran and Russia, maybe China. And I haven't seen much about that. But if that's true, I mean, how is that all working and playing out? So something to talk about in the future.
Well, yeah, those are the things that go on that we don't hear about until history books are written, unless something leaks out or someone wants to make the point that, an official leak where they tell somebody so that it does get out, so that people know we haven't just been absorbing all the attacks against our cyber systems, both technical and disinformation that's been going on. It's clearly a serious problem. My last comment, if I could, in just a minute here, is that I'm really dismayed and really disappointed that the election campaign did not include a more vigorous discussion of international events. We have some serious problems in the world arena. I realize people vote their pocketbook and they're worried about the pandemic and the economy, but we also have some tremendous problems in climate change, nuclear weapons proliferation, great power rise, expansion of China, the revanchism of the Russian Federation, our relationship with countries abroad. So there's a whole host of things that really deserve attention. And supposedly the last debate, October 22nd at Belmont, there were a couple of topics: climate change and national security. But when the candidates actually got into the national security, there was a question on China, and the only response was talking about this person's bank account in China and this person's son who had a relationship with China. And really nobody answered a hard question like, how will you deal with an expansionist rising China that is now entering a more aggressive phase in its relation with the United States? These are the questions that on January 21st, the occupant of the Oval Office is going to have to contend with. So we'll continue to beat the drum here at the World Affairs Council and raise these issues because they're important for citizens to consider. So last shot for you guys.
I think we said it all.
All right. We still have the question for Dr. Walker to guide us through at the end of our session here.
All right, in the action, which for the first time addressed the disproportionate and unique impact of armed conflict on women and girls, the answer is, of course, A, UN Security Council Resolution 1325.
Well, just for the
Of
record,
course.
yeah, just for the record, I missed that.
Passed 20 years ago. Passed 20
well,
years
there
ago.
were, I mean, it was either that resolution or the U.S. Congress, and I picked the U.S. Congress answer about women. So
keep taking the quiz, everybody out there, tnwac.org. And while you're there, please sign up to be a member, and an attractive coffee mug and many other benefits will be headed your way. So thank you all for being with us at our weekly Global News Review. Dr. Breck Walker, Ambassador Dick Bowers, thank you so much for taking time out of your days. Dick, I think, you might not have gotten enough sleep last night, and appreciate you checking in with us today. Breck, thanks for coming, and we will see everybody. We will see everybody
our
next
pleasure.
week.
Thank you, Pat, for your
Thanks,
leadership.
everybody.
Adios.
Be safe. Bye-bye. Well, that was an interesting report by The Economist, and it summarizes what's going on in Xinjiang province. I would note a couple of things. One is the surveillance system in Xinjiang is probably the Chinese surveillance system on steroids, but it is not exclusive to Xinjiang province. It's ubiquitous in China, that surveillance, facial recognition, accumulating big data, knowing who's where, when. That's all going on. I had a friend who was flying into Beijing before the pandemic and walked up to a kiosk, and before they could enter their boarding pass or visa information or any data, the kiosk lit up with their full account. It knew who they were approaching the kiosk without any interaction between the individual and the kiosk. So that's just one example of how big data is being used to keep track of people, not just foreigners, but Chinese as well. There's a system in China called the social credit system. Dick, Breck, I don't know if you've heard of this, yep, where big data is used to track the behavior of individuals and corporations, et cetera, with the aim of building a trusted society in which people adhere to the rules, and it accumulates things. If you jaywalk, it will start to accumulate points. If you pay your taxes late, there's points that go into the system. And there are reports that people have been denied the ability to get on a plane or a train because they didn't have enough social credits in the system to allow them to be a trusted individual, and as punishment they were not permitted to do this or that thing. But getting back to the Uyghurs, we've got a serious issue here of how to address that, given the current climate between Washington and Beijing. The Chinese are not going to tolerate anybody interfering in their internal affairs. So the likelihood that the United States will be able to change behavior in this regard is, what would you guys say about near zero?
Well, I don't, to change behavior is obviously the ultimate goal, but to stand up for liberal beliefs in the world and a system of democracy where individuals count is something, we need to lay down that marker. The Chinese basically, it seems to me and others, I think, stability and economic advancement are more important than an individual's freedom. And that's antithetical to what at least our forefathers and what this country has stood for since it started out. In the future, security, because people are insecure, they will gravitate to someone who promises them some security. But it's a real conflict between two different worldviews, individual freedom and liberty and the worth of a particular individual, or are you part of a collective, and as long as the leadership gives you security and economic advancement, you're expected to toe the line.
And I think the key word in the stability equation there is total control of the Communist Party.
Yes.
They are not going to tolerate any pushback to their authority anywhere in China, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, wherever.
Well, go ahead, Brent.
I was just going to say, it's interesting, though, that with all the mass migrations of meaningfully sized populations from other places throughout Western Europe and parts of Asia, it's interesting that issues are being raised that haven't been raised before in terms of that are from a government perspective, national security issues. And if there were a large separatist movement to develop in northwestern China, that would present some problems for the Chinese government. And even human rights advocates like, if I'm pronouncing this right, Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar, she has come out for not as bad as the Chinese, but certainly has been in favor of. So it's just interesting, some of these issues that are raised now that are modern day issues that governments are, and again, I'm not in any way condoning the Chinese at all, but the governments are dealing with issues that are difficult ones right now.
Well, yeah, I think in the case of Aung San Suu Kyi, she was elected to the head of government there, even though the military is clearly behind what's going on in Myanmar. But she went to the UN and openly defended the government's actions against the Rohingya, which are basically ethnic cleansing, pushing them out into Bangladesh, raiding villages. So there's been open genocide in the country, and she's stood up. She's a Nobel laureate. There was a movement among some activists to strip her of her title of Nobel laureate. So you're right. There's being a human rights crusader, and then there's towing the line within your own government. So,
well, one of the things that the Chinese are trying to do is basically extinguish Uyghur culture. I mean, first off, the idea that there can be Muslims practicing their religion is antithetical to the control of the Communist Party. And I think they're part of this effort on the part of the Chinese for Uyghur women to marry a Han Chinese man so that they can eventually dilute the Uyghur culture and ethnicity. So this is, blatant racism basically is what this is all about.
Well, and there have been involuntary sterilizations of Uyghur women.
Yes, exactly.
So the question is, what do you do? The U.S. government is, going toe to toe with China over so many issues, and this is one of many issues. It certainly is at the top of the list in importance, along with security and other issues. There's talk of boycotting the 2022 Winter Olympic Games in China. Trade sanctions. What's the view from the State Department, Ambassador?
You lay down a marker, you tell them this is unacceptable and it's going to impact adversely our relationship. It doesn't mean we stop talking to them. But you have a whole panoply of kinds of things, as you mentioned. You can boycott this or put a tariff on that. I think in the bully pulpits of the world, we need to start engaging again. I understand that China and Russia last week were elected to the UN Human Rights Council. Well, both of these countries have horrible records. But the way the UN is currently structured and the way the US is no longer leading in the UN like we did in the past, these kinds of things will happen. And China will push its development model, which is we provide you security, safety, and economic growth, and we provide a country you can be proud of. So just shut up and toe the line. Well, that's currently not the idea of liberty as we understand it, and the right of an individual to pursue his or her own path to the life they want to have.
Not a good year for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
It is not.
No, it's not.
All right.
We need Eleanor Roosevelt to come back and help us out in some of these things.
I think the footnote, moving on from China and the Uyghurs, is that there's a marked increase in the suppression, excuse me, of human rights around the world as COVID-19 provides a lot of autocratic regimes or autocratic wannabes the cover of suppressing human rights. So, we've seen even in places like India, where the Prime Minister Narendra Modi is evoking aggressive Hindu nationalism, and the Muslim minority there, if you can call 300 million people a minority, are basically second-class citizens. Likewise, in the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte is violating every canon of human dignity and murder campaigns against criminal suspects, whether they are or aren't. Brazil, Thailand, Hungary, other countries around the world are taking advantage of the cover of COVID to put down demonstrations. There was, even in Israel, there was an effort to put down a demonstration using COVID as the reason to prevent people from protesting Prime Minister Netanyahu and his being charged for various crimes there. So, gentlemen, any comments before we move on about the state of the world?
Strong men love fear. Whenever there's fear and insecurity, somebody can come around and say, I will take care of that. I will make it good for you. And there are people, unfortunately, out there who listen, including in the United States.
Well, and the one thing, good point. And the one thing I would add, Pat, is we've talked many times on this program about the lack of U.S. leadership, in my opinion, at least under the Trump administration. Global leadership has resulted in some chaotic conditions throughout the world. And I think maybe this is especially true in this area where President Trump from time to time not only says, I'll do business with dictators, but he actually compliments them on the kind of people they are and the policies they follow. And I can't imagine anything that's more encouraging of greater suppression than that kind of attitude coming from the U.S.
Yeah.
Right. The Economist had an interesting chart in their article about the Uyghurs and human rights around the world. The United States among those countries around the world that is a weaker democracy since the pandemic started back in the springtime. So that's about all you can say about that. So let's move on to our third topic. We've got just a few minutes to briefly talk about the presidential debates, and we have here in Nashville, Tennessee, coming up. Let's switch gears here. The presidential debate at Belmont University tomorrow night. It's would have been the third debate in the series, but they skipped last week due to the illness of President Trump from COVID-19. He didn't want to do a remote debate, so that one was scrapped. And we're left with the event on the 22nd, tomorrow night at Belmont University. And these are the topics there. The Trump administration, the Trump campaign said that the third debate should have been on foreign policy. The debate commission, the head of the debate commission, said that there was really no precedent for that. So these are the topics that will be discussed: COVID-19, American families, race in America, climate change, national security, and leadership. Dick, what do you think about not having an evening devoted strictly to foreign policy, but including a number of other topics into the debate tomorrow night?
Well, the topics that you have up there, some of them can lead into that discussion on foreign policy topics. I think the fact that there's not something really focused hard on that is reality of where the US is in the world at the moment. We do not have a glaring, gee, we got fire, ring the alarms, we need to take something, care of something in the world. So we're kind of tidying up the overextension that we had in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places in the world. But the American public is more interested in, I think, jobs, future, COVID-19, schools. So we're focused fairly inwardly at the moment. And I think that'll be reflected in the discussion, although I will posit that President Trump will have a list of success stories on his foreign policy, and he will tout them out, like, moving our embassy to Jerusalem, getting the Gulf states to recognize Israel. It looks like we're on the cusp of signing an extension agreement with the Russians on the New START treaty, things of that sort. So he'll have a punch list. Oh, and don't forget, he renegotiated NAFTA. Some of these things are kind of, wait a minute, what is this really a success story? Anyway, that's my take on it, Pat.
Breck, any thoughts on the debate tomorrow night? What are you looking forward to hearing from one side or the other on international issues?
Well, I'd love to hear some discussion about their respective strategies towards both candidates, their respective strategies towards China, American relations with China going forward. It seems like that's one of the 2 or 3 biggest foreign policy issues that whoever the next presidential administration is, will be dealing with. So I'd definitely like to hear about that. Plus, Pat, I heard there's a rumor, maybe this is false, that as chairman of the Tennessee World Affairs Council, it'll be your finger on the mic mute button during the debate. I was wondering about that.
Well, I'm not chairman, but thank you for that. Yeah, we are having a debate party. We'll mention that here in just a second. But we will not be cutting the mic off anyone. I think it's illustrative to see the candidates in their interactions. I think people are calling the first debate a dumpster fire. Hopefully we won't have that tomorrow night. They are turning off the mic for the first 2 minutes of each of the 6 segments, in which each candidate provides 2 minutes to answer a question. So the moderator will be cutting the mic for that portion, but then the rest of the debate will be back and forth. We might as well talk about the debate watch. We're running long on time here, but I want to make sure that everybody knows that the World Affairs Council, in cooperation with the Tennessean and their project on Civility Tennessee, David Plazas, the editor of the opinion engagement section of the Tennessean and USA Today, he and I will be kicking off a debate watch party at 7:30 p.m. Central Time tomorrow evening. We've got a great collection of guest speakers. Panelists will talk about the mechanics of elections, campaigns. We've got some experienced people from senatorial and presidential campaigns, think tanks in Washington, and some local folks here. High school student is going to talk about the youth perspective on what's going on. So that should be a great lead up to the debate. So you can catch the pre-debate watch party at 7:30 p.m. And then we will have embedded in our Zoom meeting room the actual candidates debate. And we will be conducting debate bingo. And we're putting together bingo cards with all of the possible terms from big lead to come on man. whatever you think might be the appropriate utterance of one of the other candidates. So that should be fun during the debate, and then we'll follow up with a half hour of post-debate conversation. We'll do some surveys of the audience. And just as a marker here, we have broken our attendance level for a Zoom room. We're over 120 attendees. It'll be an interesting management problem, but we will endeavor to let everybody get their voice in the chat room, or raising your hand, or
You have the mute button, Pat. You have the mute.
or in other way participating. So join us for pre-debate at 7:30, the debate, and debate bingo at 8 o'clock. We'll watch the debate and then have a conversation afterwards. We've got some messages here in the box. Let's see, we've got questions. Sana asked, hair from Uyghur female prisoners is making its way to our market. So that's not a question, but a comment. Austin Travis says that what's the likelihood of the ICC's initial investigation of China's actions against the Uyghurs moving forward to a full trial? And if that did happen, what would be the impact? Would the US support that even though we aren't an ICC member? Some general questions for the Gambia case against China and the ICJ as well. Dick, I don't know, and Austin, you probably know the answer. I suspect China is not a party to the ICC. We'd have to do a quick search. I
suspect the same. I don't know for sure, but I would suspect they are also not.
Yeah, Austin is correct that the United States is not a signatory to the ICC. In fact, the State Department has sanctioned some figures from the court over a case involving Israel, and there's been some pushback on that. So we'll have to take a look at that. But I think the answer would be that China would resist any interference from any body, the UN or a sovereign country, as far as interference in its internal affairs.
I agree.
Now whether the ICC has any legitimacy in China, we'll have to check that out. But I think that's the answer. Michelle Chan asks or comments: the U.S. And Saudi Arabia in 5-year wars against Yemen creates the biggest humanitarian crisis in Yemen. Million children will be starved to death. A big violation of human rights. Yes, I think human rights organizations are standing up against the campaign in Yemen between the Houthis, the Yemeni government, the Saudi military. The UAE was involved in a larger way, has pulled back some, but that's Yemen was in terrible trouble to begin with in terms of its economic development. There's a place where water resources are terribly taxed. The war has not contributed in any good way to resolving that problem. So yes, Michelle, you're correct that the humanitarian situation in Yemen begs for an intervention and a resolution of the battle there. Unfortunately, it's a symbol of the proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi Arabia claims that Iran is involved in arming the Houthis. There's been ample evidence of that. Iran claims that Saudi Arabia has no business there. So it's probably going to involve a larger resolution of differences between Tehran and Riyadh over their competition before the Yemeni situation is resolved. Dick?
No, I was just going to say, I think it reflects the fact that we have been supporting the Saudis in this effort from the get-go in terms of supplying munitions and equipment and various kinds of things. And basically, it has not become a political issue in the United States, except for particular groups who might want to try to rally pro or con. But Congress hasn't done anything about this. It's not people talking about, gee, we got to take care of this kind of thing. So it reflects the isolationism, if you will, or the inward focus of the American public.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move along here. We got to get to Breck's question. But first, I want to mention that if you're not already aware of our Election 2020 series, please take a look at the archives that we have of these panels. We really can't portray in this slide the quantity and quality of speakers that came together for these programs. Ambassadors, specialists from think tanks, scholars, military people across the board, some top tier individuals got involved in this Election 2020 series. And all of these are in the archives at the youtube.com/TNWAC. So check them out. We still have the election watch party, the debate watch party, and part 2 of America's Place in the World. That will be a week from tomorrow. Ambassador Tom Pickering and Ambassador John Kornblum, moderated by Professor Tom Schwartz. And then several weeks after the election, we'll have a special program called What's Next. So that's it. We're going to jump to our question. Gentlemen, any other comments before we work our way out?
No, thank you.
Okay. Well, we'll get on the question. Breck, over to you.
All right. The question was, again, which country is going to have youthful demonstrations wrapped around a significant anniversary on October the 25th? And the answer is D, Iraq.
Great. Okay, just one last note that we are very pleased to mark our 100th podcast and 60th webinar. So we look forward to bringing you more programs in the Global Tendency podcast series and in our video archive at youtube.com/TNWAC. And of course, you can go to our website and scroll down and see what's coming up on the calendar and sign up for our programs still to come. Gentlemen, thanks so much. Happy 100th.
Thank you.
It looks good on all of us.
Yeah, you surprised me with that picture you dug up there, Pat. So I'm going to have to find one of you in your submarine outfit there again.
Okay, well, good luck with that.
Have a good week, gentlemen.
Thanks, good to see you all.
Everybody be safe. Thanks for coming.